for every hour she grew twice as much as she had done the hour before. And nobody knew what to do, nor where the Princess was to sleep. Fortunately her clothes had grown with her, or she would have been very cold indeed. And now she sat on the common in her green gown embroidered with gold, looking like a great hill covered with gorse in flower. You cannot possibly imagine how large the Princess was growing, and her mother stood wringing her hands on the castle tower, and the Prince Florizel looked on broken-hearted to see his Princess snatched from his arms and turned into a lady as big as a mountain. The King did not weep or look on. He sat down at once and wrote to his fairy godmother asking her advice. He sent a weasel with the letter, and by return of weasel he got his own letter back again, marked "Gone away, left no address." It was now, when the kingdom was plunged into gloom, that a neighbouring king took it into his head to send an invading army against the island where Melisande lived. They came in ships, and they landed in great numbers, and Melisande, looking down from her height, saw alien soldiers marching on the sacred soil of her country. "I don't mind so much now," said she, "if I can really be of some use this size." And she picked up the army of the enemy in handfuls and double handfuls, and put them back into their ships, and gave a little flip to each transport ship with her finger and thumb, which sent the ships off so fast that they never stopped till they reached their own country. And when they arrived there, the whole army to a man said it would rather be court-martialled 100 times over than go near the place again. Meantime Melisande, sitting on the highest hill on the island, felt the land trembling and shivering under her giant feet. "I do believe I'm getting too heavy," she said, and jumped off the island into the sea, which was just up to her ankles. Just then a great fleet of warships and gunboats and torpedo boats came in sight, on their way to attack the island. Melisande could easily have sunk them all with one kick, but she did not like to do this because it might have drowned the sailors, and besides, it might have swamped the island. So she simply stooped and picked the island as you would pick a mushroom, for of course all islands are supported by a stalk underneath, and carried it away to another part of the world, so that when the warships got to where the island was marked on the map, they found nothing but sea, and a very rough sea it was, because the Princess had churned it all up with her ankles as she walked away through it with the island. When Melisande reached a suitable place, very sunny and warm, and with no sharks in the water, she set down the island, and the people made it fast with anchors, and then everyone went to bed, thanking the kind fate which had sent them so great a princess to help them in their need, and calling her the saviour of her country and the bulwark of the nation. But it is poor work being the nation's bulwark and your country's saviour when you are miles high and have no one to talk to, and when all you want to be is your humble right size again, and to marry your sweetheart. And when it was dark, the Princess came close to the island, and looked down from far up at her palace and her tower, and cried, and cried, and cried. It does not matter how much you cry into the sea, it hardly makes any difference, however large you may be. Then, when everything was quite dark, the Princess looked up at the stars. "I wonder how soon I shall be big enough to knock my head against them," said she. And as she stood stargazing, she heard a whisper right in her ear, a very little whisper, but quite plain. "Cut off your hair," it said. Now, everything the Princess was wearing had grown big along with her, so that now there dangled from her golden girdle a pair of scissors as big as the Malay Peninsula, together with a pincushion the size of the Isle of Wight, and a yard measure that would have gone round Australia. And when she heard the little, little voice, she knew it, small as it was, for the dear voice of Prince Florizel, and she whipped out the scissors from her gold case, and snip, snip, snipped all her hair off, and it fell into the sea. The coral insects got hold of it at once, and set to work on it, and now they have made it into the biggest coral reef in the world, but that has nothing to do with the story. Then the voice said, "Get close to the island," and the Princess did, but she could not get very close because she was so large, and she looked up again at the stars, and they seemed to be much farther off. Then the voice said, "Be ready to swim." And she felt something climb out of her ear and clamber down her arm. The stars got farther and farther away, and next moment the Princess found herself swimming in the sea, and Prince Florizel swimming beside her. "I crept on to your hand when you were carrying the island," he explained, when their feet touched the sand and they walked in through the shallow water. "And I got into your ear with an ear trumpet. You never noticed me because you were so great then." "Oh, my dear Prince," cried Melisande, falling into his arms, "you have saved me. I am my proper size again." So they went home and told the King and Queen. Both were very, very happy, but the King rubbed his chin with his hand and said, "You've certainly had some fun for your money, young man, but don't you see we're just where we were before? Why, the child's hair is growing already." And indeed it was. Then once more the King sent a letter to his godmother. He sent it by a flying fish, and by return of fish came the answer: "Just back from my holidays. Sorry for your troubles. Why not try scales?" And on this message the whole court pondered for weeks. But the Prince caused a pair of gold scales to be made, and hung them up in the palace gardens under a big oak tree. And one morning he said to the Princess, "My darling Melisande, I really must speak seriously to you. We are getting on in life. I am nearly 20. It is time that we thought of being settled. Will you trust me entirely and get into one of those gold scales?" So he took her down into the garden and helped her into the scale, and she curled up in it in her green and gold gown like a little grass mound with buttercups on it. "And what is going into the other scale?" asked Melisande. "Your hair," said Florizel. "You see, when your hair is cut off you, it grows, and when you are cut off your hair, you grow. Oh, my heart's delight, I can never forget how you grew, never. But if, when your hair is no more than you, and you are no more than your hair, I snip the scissors between you and it, then neither you nor your hair can possibly decide which ought to go on growing." "Suppose both did?" said the poor Princess humbly. "Impossible," said the Prince, with a shudder. "There are limits even to Malevola's malevolence. And besides, Fortuna said scales. Will you try it?" "I will do whatever you wish," said the poor Princess. "But let me kiss my father and mother once, and nurse, and you too, my dear, in case I grow large again, and can kiss nobody any more." So they came one by one and kissed the Princess. Then the nurse cut off the Princess's hair, and at once it began to grow at a frightful rate. The King and Queen and nurse busily packed it, as it grew, into the other scale, and gradually the scale went down a little. The Prince stood waiting between the scales with his drawn sword, and just before the two were equals he struck. But during the time his sword took to flash through the air, the Princess's hair grew a yard or two, so that at the instant when he struck the balance was true. "You are a young man of sound judgment," said the King, embracing him, while the Queen and the nurse ran to help the Princess out of the gold scale. The scale full of golden hair bumped down onto the ground as the Princess stepped out of the other one, and stood there before those who loved her, laughing and crying with happiness because she remained her proper size, and her hair was not growing any more. She kissed her Prince 100 times, and the very next day they were married. Everyone remarked on the beauty of the bride, and it was noticed that her hair was quite short, only 5 feet 5 1/4 inches long, just down to her pretty ankles, because the scales had been 10 feet 10 1/2 inches apart, and the Prince, having a straight eye, had cut the golden hair exactly in the middle. End of Melisande.